episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today is no different. Today you will get three phenomenal guests. I just muted all of you guys, and I'll ask you to keep yourselves muted when you're not speaking because there's a little weird audio glitch going on. But of course, as I mentioned, this is Surviving the Survivor, best guest in true crime. And today we are talking Kouri Richins. I'll digress very quickly to say that Carm, the matriarch of the show, called me seconds before going on air and said, don't digress. So I digressed to tell you that she told me not to digress. So I will not digress tonight in respect to my mother. Kouri Richins, 34 years old. She is a mother of three. She is accused of poisoning her 39-year-old husband, Eric Richins, with a lethal dose of 5 times the legal amount of fentanyl at their home in this small mountain town near Park City, Utah. This happened back in March of 2022. Reportedly, according to the state at least, as a means to collect millions in life insurance funds so she could flip a house and ultimately be with her lover. Yes, you heard that right. We heard about text messages during a preliminary hearing. On the second day of this preliminary hearing, which happened this week, the judge basically said that prosecutors have presented enough evidence against Kouri Richins to proceed with a jury trial. Here to discuss all this, Greg Skordas, friend of the show here often. He represents, or at least at one point, I'm not sure if he still does, we'll ask him, was representing the family of Eric Richins. He's practiced law since 1982, began his career in the Salt Lake Legal Defenders Association. Megan Connor, she is the mother of 6 spectacular human beings, a breaker of generational trauma cycles. She herself survived sex trafficking as a child, spending almost 40 years in other abusive systems before finally learning how to break free. She's now an author, a coach, and a podcast host. The podcast is Midlife Revolution Podcast. Last, certainly not least, one of my favorite guys is Ted Rowlands, because he just tells it like it is. He has worked for over 20 years in the news business. Of course, you know him now on Court TV. Quick plug for Court TV. I'm going to be on there tonight, right after this, 9 o'clock, talking Donna Adelson. So please join us on Ted's network, Court TV. But he also worked at CNN and ABC News. He's covered the biggest cases out there. Right now, he's being featured on 2 different Scott Peterson documentaries. So check those out, one on Netflix, one on Peacock. He also covered the O.J. Simpson trial, Michael Jackson, Jodi Arias, Robert Blake, Bill Spector, the biggest of the big names. So welcome to all of you, and appreciate you being here. So this hearing was actually delayed from May, Greg Skordas, for a variety of reasons. Now the judge, just to move forward a half step, has scheduled the next pretrial conference for September 23rd. No jury trial date has been set yet. However, we now know that Kouri Richins will stand trial. Just kind of a no-brainer, Greg. Was it just going through the legal sort of protocol, and dotting the I's, checking, crossing the T's? I mean, was there any doubt ever that she would not stand trial? Oh, and you're muted. That was my fault. Let me unmute you. There you go.
There was no doubt at all, Joel. In Utah, which follows the model of many states, a preliminary hearing is a cause determination. It's a hearing to decide whether or not there's even sufficient evidence to go to trial. The evidence is weighed in the light most favorable to the state, and the state only has to put on what we call a prima facie case. So once they establish any evidence that for which a jury could find guilt, the judge will bind the case over, what we call it, and schedule the case for trial. If you're right. There's a pretrial in September. They're looking at a trial date, probably April of 2025 at the earliest. And part of the delay was because Kouri Richins' previous retained counsel couldn't stay on the case anymore for conflict reasons. She got a public defender, a couple of public defenders from the Summit County area where this occurred, and they've had a little bit of a learning curve getting up to speed.
I'm going to tease something, which is probably going to come back to bite me in the behind, but I'm 97.3% sure we are going to have the first interview tomorrow night with Sky Lazaro. She is the former attorney of Kouri Richins. I was talking to her today, and she is likely going to be on our show, giving us a perspective that I don't think anyone else necessarily has, because she was the attorney, as Greg just said, representing Kouri till a couple of issues came up that we will discuss hopefully tomorrow night. The 3% chance or less than 3% chance could happen. We roll with the punches here at STS. Ted Rollins, to you, you've covered more of these cases than you probably want to admit, even though you still look like you're 33. Did anything jump out at you about this preliminary hearing, except I guess some of the obvious that she was having an affair and these things that we're going to get into in a little bit?
Yeah, well, the affair, big time. The text messages between her and her paramour, as the prosecutor referred to him as. I love that term. She texted him at one point, if he could just go away, life would be so perfect, and then said, just hang on until Friday. And guess what? Her husband's dead on Friday. To me, that was like, oh boy, she has a massive uphill climb. The other part was the defense sort of, and it doesn't mean it's going to come out at trial that this will be their strategy. The defense semi-argued that, well, Judge, we don't know that the fentanyl that she got from the housekeeper was the same fentanyl that killed Eric, which is all right, we admit that she got the fentanyl. And I just can't imagine a jury not saying game over, housewife, buys fentanyl, kills husband. It seems to all be there. And I get it. It's a prelim. It's all prosecution. It's a public version of a grand jury, but there's a lot there.
Yeah, there's plenty. And we're going to get into some of the texts, some of the issues with the housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, who has immunity. We'll talk about that. This, of course, is Kouri Richins looking quite serious there. And I guess she has reason to be. Megan Connor, I hate doing this because you're so much more. You're not defined by your cousin, Lori Vallow, but you can't help but sort of compare and contrast in some ways Kouri Richins and your cousin, Lori, who's going to be spending a life behind bars. How do you see them as similar? How do you see them as dissimilar?
Well, in both of these cases, obviously, there's life insurance money involved. You've got Kouri, who had her business, was in a little bit of trouble, cash flow financially. And I think she saw that big life insurance payout as a way to dig herself out of that hole. And then, of course, you've got, an affair that's happening and basically wanting to just get rid of the spouse and, and be with the paramour. I love that word too. So those are some similarities. Where I think there are some differences is that we don't see the same hyper religiosity in Kouri's life as we did with Lori, and she seemed to be in many other ways a little bit more normal, a little bit more, sort of blends into the landscape. And we don't have a whole lot of people coming out saying that they saw these traits in her early on, or that they were worried for anything else happening. Lori was on her fourth husband when all this started. So it's a little bit more of a traditional Mormon background coming from Kouri.
That's interesting. Kind of the one thing, less so with Lori, if I'm being honest, but in the earlier Lori years, she and Kouri, they just look so incredibly benign and innocent. Attractive young women in their heyday, I guess. But I mean, this is just an example of you can't really judge a book by its cover, right, Megan?
Yeah, exactly. I think we've seen this happen with a lot of these women who, commit heinous atrocities. Not all of them have these sort of traits that you would look at them and think, oh, that's a disaster waiting to happen. It's always surprising, I think, and it's an interesting social idea that attractive women are not capable of horrible violence. Obviously, we've seen a lot of examples of how that's not true, but I think sometimes women tend to get a pass, especially if they're attractive, tend to be given a little bit of benefit of the doubt. We saw a lot in Lori's case where she charmed law enforcement, got herself out of her psychological evaluation with flying colors. So it's interesting to think about the criminals who are attractive and the way they're treated differently.
Ashley here is claiming that Kouri Richins' jury selection starts April 28th. I have not heard this. I've not heard Greg or Ted. Greg, I guess. Is this accurate as far as you know?
It's accurate to the extent that the judge scheduled a trial date, Joel. Of course, the trial date is very likely to get bumped, although he set it far enough down the road that there's probably not a lot of excuse to get it bumped. But yeah, he scheduled the trial date in April with a pretrial in September. I think the attorneys are going to go in that day and say, hey, we're either ready or we're not. They may be the consulting experts. Who knows? I would say that's a far enough date that the defense should be able to get up to speed. But if they're not, it could go later than that. That's the earliest date it could go to trial.
Okay. And Greg, since you're there, this judge, his name is Richard Mrazek, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. What's his reputation in Utah? Good judge, tough judge, fair judge?
Joel, I have to appear before this man, so he's the greatest judge in America. But he's actually a very fair judge. He doesn't come from a criminal background. He's assigned to the 3rd District, which includes Salt Lake, Summit, and Tooele counties. But Summit, which is where this is, it's actually in Park City, only has one judge. So he's the judge up there, and he's been there for actually a couple of years. Very, very bright. I mean, he's a person that could be on the Supreme Court if he wanted, and very fair. I mean, he's not a pro-prosecution judge by any means.
Oh, there you go. Ted,
and he's got the best voice ever. He's got this super deep voice that just rips through the courtroom. I mean, he's if you watch, I watched the prelim, and he seems fair. He's asking questions about where his ruling. You can see him thinking it through. I'm looking forward to the trial, partly because of the judge.
And that's interesting. When you said the voice, it immediately reminded me of Troconis, Michelle Troconis's trial judge. He had like the voice of God, like the Morgan Freeman voice. So it's always interesting when you get a judge with a voice like that. But Ted Rollins, to you, Kim kind of teasing the text here. Kouri texts that she needs something stronger. I'm not sure if this was to the paramour or possibly to Carmen Lauber. Pretty damning evidence, Ted. I mean, what can you do with this if you're her defense?
It's when you now have the prosecution's attempted murder charge where she allegedly throws some fentanyl after she gains the fentanyl into the sandwich on Valentine's Day. He takes a bite and survives. She then needs something stronger, meaning more fentanyl, and she needs to deliver it in a tighter package, either a lemon drop shot, which was brought up by the state during the prelim, or her story, the Moscow Mule. Either way, from a defense standpoint, the fact that they're saying, well, her fentanyl that she received might not have been the same fentanyl, that's a losing battle for jurors, because where else is he getting the fentanyl if there's no evidence of him being a drug user, which according to his family, and Greg would know, there is none. So I watching the prelim, it's very difficult to see where they're going to go and win. She has to take the stand. She has to come up with a doozy of a story and try to win us all over and win that jury over.
Yeah, and Greg, just to add on to what Ted was just saying, as far as we know, Eric was clean. He was not a drug addict, living a good life, living a healthy life, had his 3 kids. A lot of people have asked you, why didn't he just leave the marriage? Because there was another incident. And you always say it's those 3 kids, right, Greg?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, he he wanted to stay and be a father. He didn't want to have a divorce where you're dealing with joint custody and you get this time and I get that time. And he wanted to be with his boys. He was going to be with his boys no matter what it took. And like Megan said, I mean, Kouri is a pretty woman. I mean, Lori Vallow's a pretty woman, and you know, the men want to stay with them. Hope that they're beyond hope that maybe something's going on and they're not trying to be killed by their spouse. And so, you know, it's a tough case. And I think that he stayed with her rather, because he wanted to do whatever he could to preserve his family and make sure his boys were raised in a traditional family.
Ted, I apologize. I'm blocking you, but Ned Smith says it's the love of money that is the root of all evil. I guess there's an argument to be made for that. You look at Eric Richins, a very successful entrepreneur. You see him there with his 3 children. And Megan, I wanted to come to you next on that. I mean, what strikes me, obviously, in your cousin Lori's case, Tylee and JJ are no longer with us. But in this case, these are going to be kids, more than likely, whose father is now gone and whose mother is going to be behind bars. What is it about this sort of reckless regard for the children when it comes to these people, these defendants?
Well, I think it comes down to just pure selfishness, you know, and we saw this in Lori's case, and I think it's true here, is that it looks like that Kouri wanted what she wanted, and she didn't really consider how it was going to affect her children until later, which is what I find so interesting about this case, is that she wrote this book on grief and how young children can handle losing a parent. So maybe some of the guilt got to her retroactively, and she wanted to try and help repair some of that. But that's exactly what I think is so harming and difficult about these kinds of cases, and the Brightigan case as well. It's the children are the ones that end up without parents, and they end up suffering so much. And the perpetrator doesn't seem to consider at all the lifetime of trauma and damage that it's going to put on those children.
Yeah, it kind of blows my mind that they are always overlooked in this ripple effect of the victims. You know, it's obviously Eric Richins, but it's so much more than just him. It's his family, it's his sisters, his parents, his kids, and it goes on. I was actually just speaking on the phone with Ruth Markell today, getting ready for our coverage of Donna Adelson's trial. And look, it's tough. It's very tough. I mean, as you prepare to go through these things, she's had multiple trials, so it's a lot to bear. And I don't think people, obviously, who are in the commissions of these crimes care or think about it. I don't know what it is, but it's pretty damn selfish. That's for sure. Jersey girl here. I can't believe what people will kill over. So many other options than taking someone's life. During this preliminary hearing, Greg, on the second day, which was yesterday, Kouri also enters a plea of not guilty. I should say pleas, because it was to 11 counts about another crime that she's charged with. Back in March, the state accused her of putting fentanyl into Eric's sandwich. This happened 17 days before the murder. This was on Valentine's Day. Talk to us legally about this. She was charged with this earlier. She was pleading to it today. How is this going to play into the overall trial, this secondary poisoning?
Yeah, it's like you said, there are actually numerous counts, but that's an attempted murder charge. So the lead count is the murder, the capital murder. Then there's an attempted murder. There's also the counts related to her purchasing the drugs and the manipulation of the finances that the parties had, forging documents and that type of thing. So the state has filed a whole plethora of charges. Of course, the big ticket item is the capital homicide, but the other ones are felonies, they're serious charges, and they could result in significant prison terms all by themselves.
Ted Rollins, you're an observer of humans, and if you're a dog lover of dogs as well, I suppose. But what was your observation of Kouri during this preliminary hearing? How did she come across to you? She seems to be in a bit of denial, I think, but how did she come across to you?
Yeah, she was doing the classic defendant taking notes trick. And then, like, if one little thing is inaccurate in the testimony of someone, I noticed that she's right away talking to her attorney, like, okay, they got the wrong person. This is, it's that overreaction to little things, clearly in denial, clearly trying to still convince herself and probably more importantly, her family members and her loved ones, her friend group. She had created this life and she was, a very successful woman, this real estate mogul, mother and wife. She still wants those people to love her and to think that she didn't do it. And you could see it with her behavior, sitting at that defense table. And as far as that second charge, the fact that that's going forward to me, it's huge because it is a little lacking in terms of evidence to get that attempted murder over the top, because they didn't test the sandwich. They didn't have, blood on him, that it was fentanyl. But the story is fantastic. A Valentine's Day, his favorite sandwich, he gets sick. That is just, it adds so much to the state's story, their opening statement when they eventually do go to trial.
Yeah. We are going to get to some of these text messages and some of the correspondence that happened between Carmen Lauber, the housekeeper who has been given immunity. But first to Megan, the non-attorney here, as is Ted, I think, but as am I think. But Megan, what about, Ted just talked about the difficulty that the defense is going to have here. There's no doubt. So do you see them kind of going with some sort of mental health defense? Are they going to find something that was quote unquote not right with Kouri and rely on that? Because I just don't know. Look at this, Miranda Lee. Joel usually ignores me, but happy first year. Thank you for being with us, Miranda Lee. And I love your mustache, Miranda. What about that, Megan? I mean, are we going to see something related to mental health here? Because that's going to be sort of a Hail Mary for the defense.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that we don't really have a track record of Kouri exhibiting any signs of mental health issues, as far as I know, and we don't really have that, that evidence to back it up, that in the past she had any difficulty, other relationships and things like that. So I think it would be a really hard, tack to take. And as we know in Lori's case, she wouldn't allow them to argue any sort of mental health issues. So, Kouri may not want them to argue that either. It does seem to me, as Ken was saying, that she really does believe that she's innocent, or at least she's deluding herself into portraying that character in the courtroom, with these sort of overreactions to incorrect statements or what she thinks are incorrect and things like that. I think she's setting the stage that she's innocent, and she's probably going to play that all the way to the very end.
By the way, the state said, look, there was really nothing in it for her because Eric was getting ready to divorce her. Her only way to, financial gain was through murder. But Kim here has a question, Greg Skordas. If she just divorced him, would she have gotten alimony? Interesting question. So perplexing why these women choose murder. Good point. Maybe she just should have gone through with the divorce and tried to get paid by the husband. What would have happened under that circumstance, do you think?
She would have received significantly less than she would if he predeceased her. There was a prenuptial agreement that limited what she would receive if they got divorced. So financially, she was in a much better position as a widow than as a divorcee. And she knew that. And I think that's part of the state's claim here. And that's part of the motivation. That's part of the reason why the state claims that she did this. Of course, motive isn't always an important part of a criminal case, but I think the state has a pretty good case for motive, financial motive. And that's going to be a big part of their case, as they sort of started to outline a little bit during the preliminary hearing.
Yeah. And Greg, Amanda's saying he was going to leave. I thought I heard. Apparently he was talking to divorce attorneys. You probably have better knowledge. Is this what was happening behind the scenes? Was he looking to separate from her through divorce?
Yes, he was. And I think that was part of the reason for the immediacy here, why she was anxious to get this done before they got divorced, because with the prenup and just the way that his finances were set up with respect to his business, so that she would not get a part of his business. That was the one thing he was mostly concerned about. But if he died, she would have at least an arguable share to half of the business, which was worth a substantial amount of money.
Yeah. Ted, I'm just thinking of all these cases you've covered, from Scott Peterson to OJ. The list goes on. And, every Friday I've got America's most respected detective, Phil Waters, and the FBI's Scott Duffy, who come on. They're regulars on Fridays. And I always try to catch them with something that's going to surprise or shock them. So I'll pull out some crazy true crime stories, head rolling down the street. And they're like, nope, 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 nope. Does anything surprise you anymore, Ted? I mean, are you jaded by doing this for so many years? Are you surprised that people kill over $1 million or $2 million? Does any of this surprise you anymore?
Yeah, not really, actually. But what surprises me is it never ends, and the story after story after story you hear, and people are doing basically the same thing. There's only a few motives to kill, and love and money are the big ones. And the ones for money are so ridiculous, because yes, Kouri Richins would have gotten as much money. The kids would have gotten child support. She would have had money to live, and guess what? She still had herself and her manipulative brain. She would have hooked someone else, and she would have been fine. Now she's sitting in a jail cell waiting to go to trial. It does, over time. I guess it does surprise me that it keeps going, and people are just so stupid. Their motives are so off base. Scott Peterson, same thing. Really? I mean, a divorce is a lot easier. And I do think a huge part of the equation is ego. It's not all the money. It's her standing in the community. It's that everybody loves me. My family loves me. And I can't get a divorce. I have to. But if I'm the victim of losing my husband, well, then they'll treat me even better. And I think they're delusional, and they go into it with that mentality. They don't even think about getting caught, which is crazy.
I mean, it's got to be something of the brain makeup, because all you have to say to me is prison, and I'm not doing anything. Hopefully I don't do anything unintentional. But Megan, you're the de facto philosopher on this panel. So Becky Ireland, what's with all these women lately killing husbands and children? We've had this debate before. Some people say it's more now than before. Others say it's been going on since the beginning of time. That's one question. So what's been going on here? And then what is the deal with her book? I mean, do you think that shows premeditation, that she wrote this book? I mean, and what does it say about her psychology? I mean, it's pretty twisted.
Yeah, so as far as women killing husbands and children, I just can't help but think that there is a lot of generational trauma that gets passed down. And when it doesn't get healed, it comes out in really dysfunctional ways. And I think a lot of these women maybe were feeling pressure and expectations of being the perfect wife and the perfect mother, and not being able to live up to that, and getting sort of shoved into that box where that's the only way that they're acceptable to their family. And so then that's where it comes in of this, well, they'll respect me more if I'm a widow than if my marriage is a failure. And if I don't have my kids with me all the time, then I'm a failure as a mother as well. And so facing that failure, there's so much shame attached to it that the brain starts going in crazy directions. And as far as the book is concerned, I heard a rumor that it was ghostwritten. I don't know if that's true or how much involvement she had in actually writing the book, but it really seemed to me to be a publicity stunt almost, to say, you see, look, I didn't have anything to do with his death. I'm obviously trying to help my children grieve their father's passing. I'm trying to be a good mom, and I'm grieving too, and just sort of putting out this public persona and portrayal, kind of like we saw this with Lori too. She was one person in public and she was another person behind closed doors.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, Ted, back to you on the book here. We're looking at it, and I'm coming to you because she was on local Salt Lake City TV. There's no way for those reporters to know, but it's embarrassing, I guess, in hindsight, for local news and news in general. There would be no way to know. But what about this? I mean, I think if it's ghostwritten, it's almost even worse, because then it was just like she was using it as a tool, right? It was like, literally, let me pay someone to do this, and now I have a tool to say, how could I have done it? Because here I am grieving. This book is all about grief.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine the Live at 5 host saying after we have an author, hey, did you kill your husband? I mean, there's the way that was all set up. It was this nice story about this poor grieving wife, but I think it goes back to her calculation, whether she wrote it, had it ghostwritten, or worked with someone to write it. What was the motivation of writing it, knowing that you are the source of it? It is that building yourself up and also throwing a weird deflection out there, thinking you're going to outsmart detectives. Like, oh, if I write this, and outsmarting your family members, and more importantly, his family members, who they were onto her right away. It's just deep-seated narcissism playing itself out in front of everybody and not caring. I mean, imagine doing that if you had a normal thought process of going on television with your book and knowing that you killed the person. It's the definition of insanity, but she knew exactly what she was doing.
Yeah, and Greg, I'm coming back to you in a moment, but I just had a thought. I mean, Megan, do you think that, because of Instagram and all the social media where everyone is like living in this perfect world, that people are now in essence deluded? So Kouri Richins, I have no idea if she's looking at Instagram, but I'm assuming she is. You see these perfect families. I mean, do you think she just had like in her mind this perfect plan to perfectly get the insurance money to then perfectly run away with the paramour? Are things getting distorted? Maybe if I was her defense attorney, I'd use the Instagram defense, that she just thought, it was all perfect in her life and she could make things perfect. The bottom line question is, in your opinion, and it's a macro question, how do you think, the dynamics of social media technology today is affecting people who are committing these crimes?
Well, I think it's very damaging mental health wise to look at social media and see everybody's highlight reel and compare it to your real everyday life, because all of those things are so manufactured. All of the influencers, and especially the moms of TikTok and the moms of Instagram, their kids are always matching, their hair is always done, the meals always look perfect. So I think it does get embedded really early on. If you're consuming a lot of social media, you start to feel like your life should look like that all the time. And it's just not realistic. And it is damaging to mental health. We've seen these studies come out, especially for young teenage girls, how damaging it is to their self-esteem and to their mental health to have these comparisons in front of them all the time. So I think there's an argument that it contributes to overall, poor mental health, poor self-esteem, but to use it as a defense in a trial, I don't know if that's going to pass anything because thousands and thousands of us consume social media without killing anybody.
That's very good point. Very good point. And David Gargamella, I have a rule on the show. I can't mention my own book unless someone else does. And look at David wearing the NJ. So glad you wrote this memoir, Joel. It is elevating. We were just invited to the Miami Book Fair, which is the second largest book fair in the country, and they want Carmen and I to speak. But I'll say this, it's 10% Holocaust, my mom's story there, and 90% life advice. And I say this genuinely. It's the most important story I've ever reported on, and I truly think the book can help change the way people see life, because my mom is she's a badass. There's no other way to say it. She's a tough woman, and she's overcome so much, and there are lessons to be learned from people like that. Nothing to be learned from me, but people like her, yes. Greg Skordas. So back to this, attempted poisoning. Eric did have a reaction. It was non-fatal. That day we find out, I should say the day after the attempted poisoning, Kouri texts her paramour, and I quote here, "If he could just go away, life would be perfect." So she texts him this. And then during this preliminary hearing, there's some written testimony from friends of Eric. In this written testimony, two friends of Eric recount phone conversations from the day prosecutors say he was first poisoned by his wife of 9 years. After injecting himself with his son's EpiPen and chugging a bottle of Benadryl, he awoke from a deep sleep and told his friends, I think my wife tried to poison me. This is all actually in the charging documents. This is really damning. It's sick. It's sick to read. From a legal perspective, a legal standpoint, how powerful is this as evidence for the state?
You know, it's really powerful. I don't know if the state is going to be able to get that admitted, because it's arguably hearsay. But it was certainly important in terms of the investigation, Joel, because what he did was he planted the seeds and told people, if something happens to me, you need to look at Kouri. You need to have her. You need to investigate this, and don't just walk away from it. Because, you know, this was a fentanyl overdose, which unfortunately happens all the time in this country, and which can often be overlooked by police when they arrive at a scene and see somebody dead from a drug overdose, because, you know, it just happens too much. And I think that she miscalculated the fact that the police would further the investigation, wouldn't just treat it as oh, well, another one takes too much fentanyl, and that they were going to look at it for what it probably was, which was a homicide.
By the way, Greg, how long will a trial in like this in Utah, how many days will it last after jury selection?
I would say, Joel, safely, a trial like this could probably go at least 2 and perhaps 3 full weeks. It's not a long trial, but I mean, certainly longer than your typical drunk driver or something like that.
It's not the 9-month O.J. Simpson trial, but definitely not the drunk. Yeah, definitely not the drunk driver case. But one of the things we're committing to in 2024 and 2025 is we're going to be at more of these trials. And this is one that I think I would like to at least attend part of, if not all. How do these people think they can get away with this with modern technology? They must be delusional. I mean, Ted Rollins, back to you on this. Are we finding, I don't think you're doing real-time research at Core TV, but I mean, in your own version of the research that you're doing, are you finding that it appears to be becoming more difficult to get away with anything because of digital forensic evidence and other technology?
Oh yeah, it's getting to the impossible stage. You know, if you're going to commit a murder, it's like Tellis today was found guilty in Vegas. I don't know if you followed that case at all. But yeah, he took a while. The jury, you know, spent 3 days, but he went down in flames. No matter what you think you can do, you leave your phone at home. Well, guess what? Non-phone usage is just as important as phone usage. If your pattern of phone usage all of a sudden just is dead during the time of the murder, well, guess what? That's going to be used against you too. There's really no way around the tracker. You know, we all have these trackers now that are put on us, and you have to really get lucky if indeed you're going to pull something off that includes a murder.
That is it. For sure, right there. Nikki Cuds, our friend in Jersey. Greg, I got to go back to you on this because you're the attorney here. Can they bring in the fact that the mother, Darden is her last name, I believe, had questionable history with her own girlfriend? She had a live-in girlfriend dying in a mysterious drug overdose. I think that's a great point. Nikki Cuds coming up big. Greg, can this be brought in as evidence into this case, or would it only be admissible in a trial for the mom?
Probably neither. I mean, it could be admissible perhaps if the mom testifies or gets on the stand and says, hey, you know, we've led this great life and I've never done anything. Then it could be used to impeach her. But I know the state would love to bring that in because it was an example, perhaps, of somebody that did get away with a murder exactly like what the state's alleged happened here, which was a drug overdose. So yeah, the state loves it and would like to get it in, but I don't see under the rules of evidence how that could probably be admissible in the trial against Kouri for the death of Eric.
Yeah, it seems like it would be a little bit of a stretch. So Kouri's new attorneys, they released a statement after the judge's ruling. The attorneys are Kathy Nestor and Wendy Lewis, and they write, I think we have it right here, actually. So let me get rid of this comment and let me pop this up. Here's a statement. Megan, I'll get your reaction since you're the non-attorney. We are aware that the preliminary hearing stage favors the prosecution to an extraordinary degree and respect the court's decision. We firmly believe the charges against Kouri do not withstand thorough scrutiny and are confident that a jury will find the same. Our focus now is on ensuring that justice is served through a fair trial. We are committed to defending Kouri against these charges, firmly believing that the truth will prevail. These past 15 months have taken a heavy toll on Kouri and her 3 children. It's time to bring this ordeal to an end, restore her life, and allow her and her family to move on. What is your first reaction after hearing that?
My first reaction is that by pointing out the preliminary hearing favors the prosecution, it's because they're presenting evidence. And what this tells me is probably that the defense doesn't have a lot of evidence that's going to clear Kouri of these charges, and that they're probably going to work a lot on her position in the community and maybe some character witnesses coming in. It just tells me they probably don't have much to go on, and that they think that it's not going to stand up to scrutiny. And we saw that in the hearing. They're trying to poke holes in the evidence that was collected, the evidence that wasn't collected. And, you know, that's their job, obviously, to do that. But it tells me that they don't really have a lot that's going to clear Kouri, you know, exonerate her of all of the evidence that they do have. What I found particularly interesting is it's always the forensic accounting that I think is so damning, because if you want to know where somebody's priorities are, you look at the money trail and you see that Kouri was going after bigger and bigger properties. She was getting herself in over her head. And I'm sure there was some desperation there, feeling like she was probably, her business was not doing as well. And she saw this one golden $2 million solution.
All interesting points. When I read this statement here, this graphic, Ted Rollins, to me, it's like the graphic version of a graphics version, not a graphic, but the graphical version of a local, like, Black Friday story, local news, Black Friday story. Every year, it's the same thing. Going to be the biggest, busiest shopping day of the year. There's going to be lines out the door. This just seems like such a cliche statement that any attorney would put out. I don't see much value in it other than for the attorneys to say, hey, we put out a statement. What they are doing now, these defense attorneys, though, they're picking up where Sky Lazaro left off. And one of the sort of arguments that they're beginning to make is that this housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, had her own motivation, that she would benefit from lying because she herself was facing drug charges. That's a pretty good argument, I think. Look, I think she's a convicted drug felon, and now they're saying, hey, how do we know she's telling the truth? How do we know, she was giving Kouri all these pills?
Yeah, I agree. Oh, and by the way, I'm not an attorney. I just play one on TV.
There you go.
I don't think and that's what was so shocking about the defense also articulating at one point in that prelim that they argued that the drugs in his system might not have matched the drugs that she procured from the housekeeper. Now, it doesn't make any sense to me why they would go down that road when you do have someone, whenever someone comes up and says, I sold them the drugs, juries are going to look at that person too and say, well, I don't know if I believe you because you're a drug salesperson or dealer. And, she could be the ketamine queen of Utah. Who knows? Why would they, and Greg could answer, why would you even throw that out there in the prelim that you can't prove that that her fentanyl was the fentanyl that killed him?
Yeah. Greg, you want to add to that? Since you invoked your name.
Yeah, I agree with Ted. I mean, I like what he said here. The thing about the snitch, which is what the drug dealer is that you have to corroborate what she said. And so you can't corroborate fentanyl. I mean, one pill of fentanyl looks like another. So you're right, Ted. There's no way they can show that fentanyl that was sold by her to Kouri is the same fentanyl that ended up in Eric's system. What's important, though, is that she did sell fentanyl to Kouri. And in fact, as I understand it, Joel, when they interviewed the dealer, she talked about supplying Kouri with fentanyl before it was known that Eric died of a fentanyl overdose. He was at that point, the understanding was that he died of a drug overdose, an opioid overdose. So the fact that she said, I sold her fentanyl, and the fact that Eric died of a fentanyl overdose is pretty compelling evidence. Maybe she is telling the truth. And so I don't know that that's going to be a strong defense for the defense. I think they are going to rely on reasonable doubt, like Megan can tell you they tried that in the Lori Vallow case with some limited success. But I think that's going to be the defense here. Is like, hey, where's the proof? And as we're talking about here, the state's case looks pretty compelling.
Yeah. From Kathy W here, this is a question I usually throw to Greg, but I'm going to toss to our resident philosopher, Megan Connor. I wonder why Eric, didn't try and get her away from him. People always scream, don't victim shame. Eric's no longer with us, sadly. But this is a question I think a lot of people are curious about. In your estimation, and the dynamic here is different because this is a man getting away from a woman, where most times it's a woman trying to get away from a man. What do you think? I mean, Greg always says it's the 3 kids, and I would have to agree that's a big part of it. Do you see anything else there?
Yeah, it's such a complicated situation. Anytime that any person is trying to escape an abusive or potentially harmful relationship, so many dynamics at play there. He said to his friends that he thought his wife was trying to poison him, but I'm sure that there was a lot to overcome psychologically. How do you wrap your mind around that? How do you believe that that's real? And there's a part of you that wants to believe it's not real. So you kind of outcry, but at the same time, you can't call them out for it because they may be volatile. And when you're dealing with someone who has narcissistic personality traits, imagine the scenario where Eric takes the boys and leaves. The first thing that Kouri is going to do is cry kidnapping. She's going to go to court and get the kids taken away from him. She's then going to be much more successful in whatever happens in retaliation. So it's a really complicated situation. And I don't wish that kind of a decision on anybody. It's so hard to get out of a situation like that. It's even more difficult to figure out psychologically if the person that you loved and devoted your life to is really capable of hurting you that much.
From Lindsay, who's coming out to the Don Adelson trial. I'm excited to meet her in person. Greg, do you know the answer to this? I mean, it should have been the first question, how the children are doing. Are they with a family member now, and their state of mind, if you happen to know?
I do know, and they are with a close family member. They're doing very well. They're in the same general community that they were when they were being raised. And by all accounts, they're very well taken care of. So, in terms of the children, they are in the best possible position they could be under the circumstances. And I have to hand it to the Eric Richins family that they stood up to the plate and made sure that these boys were well taken care of.
Does Kouri have any visitation rights with those kids, or they don't see her while she's in jail?
That would be entirely up to the caretakers of the children, but the jail does have visiting, and the visiting could include children. I don't know that the Richins family would feel comfortable having them see their mother in jail clothes. So I doubt that's occurred, but there would be no absolute prohibition for that.
Yeah, I don't think it would be healthy for the kids. IGG rocks. This is interesting, Ted. Eric died during the pandemic when fentanyl deaths were constantly in the news. I think Kouri thought he would be seen as just another statistic and underestimated his family fighting for justice. That's a really good point. I had not thought about it. Is that something that crossed your radar?
No, it's a good point. During that time, I think we were all a little crazy and we didn't know what was, going to happen. Probably should factor that into it. I think that she also just thought that a fentanyl death or a drug overdose usually is accompanied by family members saying, yes, this was the 10th time, or this was a pattern that had been established for years. And to not comprehend that really was a little bit, I mean, she must not have been very aware of her surroundings, because you don't just come into a beautiful home with in his life and he's very active in his business and all of a sudden he's dead and not think that his family is going to step up and say, listen, he's not a drug user. This doesn't make sense. And she underestimated that, pandemic or not.
Ted, do you have your glasses on? Would you like to react to this comment? Oh, sorry. That was a little joke. I don't know what it says either. It'd be tough to read unless you know Arabic, I guess.
I can. It says, wait, does he have a dog in his house? Yes, I do. That's why.
Ted, just coming back to you on this. So, as I was saying, these attorneys appear to be picking up where Sky Lazaro left off. We're trying to have Sky on the show tomorrow night. But basically, Sky was arguing that Eric Richins' sisters, and obviously Sky has a job to do, but she was arguing that Eric Richins' sisters, that they had a clear bias against Kouri because of this kind of ongoing battle over his estate. Also, there was an assault. I think it was Kouri. Was it Kouri that hit the sister, or the sister that hit Kouri? But the long story short, Greg, which was it? Did Kouri hit one of the sisters the day of the
funeral? Yes, she did. And she was charged with an assault for that.
I mean, this is just crazy on top of crazy. But I mean, this seems like, Ted, like it's going to fall flat on its face that Eric Richins' sisters had this, clear bias because they were battling over this, potential estate.
Yeah. Well, I bet they didn't like each other, and Kouri probably articulated that to her attorney, and they were trying to make a bigger deal than it is. But they didn't have anything to do with the fentanyl and her. I mean, this all started in 2019 when she opened up that line of credit for $250 without his knowledge and maxed it out. And then he apparently found out about it in 2020, and that starts the ball rolling. His family's always going to be on his side. And I think, that's going to fall completely flat, especially if you throw in the funeral assault.
And by the way, the family is fighting back, as they should. They filed a separate petition basically saying, look, Kouri did a life insurance policy in the amount of $2 million that she was hoping she would profit from, and mistakenly thought that she was going to inherit Eric's estate. The Summit County prosecutor also chiming in. His name is Brad. Tough name for a prosecutor. Bloodworth. Yeah, Brad Bloodworth. Argued that Kouri learned lessons during the first unsuccessful attempt on her husband's life that helped her carry out the killings. Greg, do you think that's true, that she learned something from this failed attempt and upped the dosage or whatever you would do?
Well, if you listen to the drug dealer, I mean, what Lori told her after the first one, or what Kouri told her after the first one was, hey, I need the Michael Jackson stuff, and which of course was completely a miss. But what she's saying, and what the state's theory is, that she was saying, look, you didn't give me enough juice here. We need to get the job done. And that's why it's alleged that when Eric finally was killed, he was at a level 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. And so, the theory is that she didn't get it right the first time. And by the way, there were several prior attempts, that she wanted to make sure that this one was really going to get the job done. And that's why the fentanyl that was used to finally kill him was of such a large quantity.
So, Megan, the paramour here has a name, and it is Robert Grossman. They had a digital forensics expert named Chris Kotrademus. He testified on Monday, and he basically came out and said, look, Kouri was regularly sending text messages to this guy, Robert Grossman, and she was apparently seeing him while Eric was still alive. So she was having an affair, I guess is another way to put it. This guy, Robert, worked as a handyman. He was actually repairing properties for Kouri. Again, described in previous charging documents as her paramour. Again, I mean, I'm going to use kind of the resident psychologist. Kouri reportedly started, she met Eric while she was working a very low wage job at a Home Depot. She meets this guy. She has the kids. They have the Instagram, this perfect family. And now she's on to the next guy. Is this a pattern of behavior with her, do you think? I don't know her history prior to this. I mean, why have an affair if your life is seemingly okay? Obviously it wasn't. I mean, what do you make of this? The paramour, it always seems to be love, money, drugs, the three main motives. It's predictable, but upsetting, isn't it?
It is upsetting that it's so predictable. And first of all, not a licensed mental health practitioner at all. I'm just an expert in my own trauma. So all I can give is from my own experience. But I do see there's this parallel too. This Shanna Gardner, you know, was married to a successful Microsoft executive, and then she went for somebody who was a, you know, maintenance worker in a gym. I think there's a commonality among women who have this sort of mindset where they feel like they're not being made to feel special and important, that they will start up a relationship or a text or an emotional affair with anyone who will give them attention and make them feel special and make them feel important. That's what Chad did for Lori. And, you know, even though he was kind of a arguably unsuccessful author. So we see this pattern in a lot of women. If they don't get their emotional needs met before they get into a marital relationship or a lifelong relationship, they end up in this pattern of seeking attention and validation from whatever man will give them that. And I think that it doesn't really matter what their profession is like at that time if they're going to make them feel special.
I mean, it boggles my mind how common this seems to be. Back to the specifics of these text messages, those were revealed too in the preliminary hearing. On the night Eric died, Ted, Kouri texts this guy, Robert Grossman. This is the night he died. A photo of two people kissing, not necessarily them, but two people kissing, and it was captioned, "Love you." In the week following his death, Kouri texts this guy, Grossman, "Love you." She does it again, and it's 5 different times. I mean, incredibly damning. What happens to this guy, Robert Grossman, too, from a, you know, legal, I mean, legally, I assume investigators have to be looking at him. So there's got to be that going on. But when it comes to a jury trial, this is going to sound real bad to a jury of Kouri's peers, is it not?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they have both tracks. You've got the financial motive, and then you've got Grossman showing up at court, and he's going to be going through the worst 2 to 3 hours of his life, sitting on that witness box saying yes, 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 to all of these things. And he's in a horrible position, but the state's going to use him perfectly. And if the defense tries to, there's no real angle for them because of all these texts. You know, she is in charge with the way she's texting. She's definitely, it's not him saying, just hang on till Friday, baby. It's her saying, hang on till Friday before he's dead. And so I think, yeah, he's going to be painful for him, for everybody watching, but very, very effective.
Yeah, Grossman, according to Jen Ken, who we've met and is a friend of the show, he has immunity. I know the housekeeper does. Greg, are we aware of this? Does he have immunity, this guy, Robert Grossman?
I believe so, and I believe the state went to both him and the housekeeper and said, look, do you want to be a defendant or a witness? And that's not a hard decision for people to make when they're facing prison. And so I think that they're both going to be very, very helpful witnesses to the state. Of course, that makes them biased a little bit as well, the fact that they're given something in exchange for their testimony. But my understanding is that both of them have been granted immunity by the state because their crimes, and Grossman, he may not even have a crime that he could be charged with, but yeah, he's probably in better shape helping the state than being in their crosshairs.
And I mean, in your estimation, will these be the 2 most important witnesses for the government?
I think they're both good witnesses. I don't know that Grossman is, except to establish sort of the alibi or, you know, the motive, I guess. I think the forensics are the most important witnesses here. What the experts are going to say about the things that Ken's been talking about, the text messages, the things that were found on her social media account, the things that she was looking up. We haven't even got into that yet, where she's looking at best prisons for women, you know, how to pass a polygraph test and things like that. Those are going to be very compelling. And I think that's where the state's strength lies.
Yeah. And Ted, I mean, not to belabor the fact, but this woman, Carmen Lauber, who's kind of at the center of all this and is a convicted drug felon, you know, it's obviously been revealed that she is the one. She claims to have sold fentanyl to Kouri 3 different times. And as you just heard, the the state is leaning on her. She also said that she sold Kouri up to 90 blue-green fentanyl pills, you know, basically fulfilling her request. Now, she's been given an immunity deal, but as I said, she's a convicted drug felon. And so the defense, we were talking about it earlier, is going to say, look, you can't trust her. She's a felon. But is this just, I don't know, just, is it just too damning that you've got this woman who doesn't really have an ulterior motive, in my opinion, who's coming out saying, look, I gave her 90 pills, and these pills could kill a person.
Yeah, and I'm sure she'll be authentic on the stand in that she's the real deal, right? She's a drug dealer, so she has the chops, and she'll get up there and jurors will believe her story because, yes, you're getting immunity, and this is a great deal for you. The cross-examination will try to attack her, but what's the end game? She's not getting massive financial gain if he dies. Kouri they have the two tracks. They've got the life insurance, the money track, and then the love interest track, and they have Kouri's texts. I just think that all of this is set beautifully for the state. I'd be shocked if it's anything but a guilty verdict at the end of the day. Now, we don't know everything yet. Prelim is different than a trial, but boy, the way things look after this prelim, they've got a lot of ammunition.
Yeah, a lot of, it's an uphill battle. Greg, this one's for you from Lee. Does Greg know anything about Kouri's new attorneys? Obviously, Sky is the old one. Do you know anything? They are public defenders, I believe, correct?
Correct. They're both public defenders. Most of their training has been in the federal courts. They both worked for the federal public defender's office for years. They went out on their own, started a practice about 2 years ago, and are now doing some state work. Very, very competent lawyers. They have tried a lot of cases. They're both very good. And they now have a contract to do public defender work in Summit County. So yeah, when Sky and her team had to bail out and Kouri ran out of money, they were appointed, and I think they're very competent counsel.
Ashley just gave me an idea for another YouTube channel. We should literally have Greg and then Ted and others reading the phone book. It would be amazing. COE, we're not hearing this. Should we be hearing this? Oh.
That you have a claim that Mr. Richins was poisoned on the 14th. There is no medical evidence. There is no connection. There is no causation. There is nothing but pure speculation.
Greg, is that true? This is obviously the defense making their case in the preliminary hearing. I apologize to COE because I completely forgot we had this sound, which is a big mistake from the host. The producers get mad at the host, as Ted can attest to. But Greg, did she make a point that there's no substantiation of this? It doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, she was arguing about the evidence that was presented at the preliminary hearing solely. So certainly the state will cover those bridges when they go to trial. But again, the preliminary hearing is a prima facie case. They don't need to put on their entire case. Otherwise, we'd still be watching the preliminary hearing. So what she was saying was, what you heard, Judge, in these first day and a quarter was not enough to establish probable cause of guilt. You didn't hear any causation between the fentanyl and the death. The state didn't need to put that on for a preliminary hearing, but she was arguing that the case was so weak at the preliminary hearing that it shouldn't have even been bound over. Of course, we talked earlier about the fact that it's a very low threshold. The judge did find that the state met that threshold, and he bound her over to stand trial.
We have two other bites I'm going to get to in a second, but Megan, back to you. Just the method or the tool used to kill Eric, which is fentanyl. What do you make of that? I hate to go back to Lori, which was a much more brutal killing. Basically trying to sneak in a death here. What do you, psychologically speaking, what do you make of the fact that she used fentanyl?
Yeah, again, not a licensed mental health professional, but I am always interested in hearing what Dr. John Mathias has to say about these cases. And one of the things that he talks about is that poisoning murders are very telling, indicative of somebody who is afraid of getting caught, somebody who wants to try to be sneaky, somebody who wants to experiment, somebody who wants to control other people. And we certainly saw, that was throughout Lori's life, that she was sneaking things into Charles's drinks and, giving the kids extra Benadryl before bed to get him to go to sleep earlier. So it's a way of controlling people, controlling situations. And I think that, that sort of fits here as well. Although I'll be really interested to see what does come out psychologically from Kouri, and what do we see, if anything, that she had some personality disorder traits or narcissistic traits or whatever. That'll be interesting to see if it comes out at all.
Let's play this other piece of sound. This is the judge here speaking, and we'll get Ted's reaction to this.
Prosecution has shown probable cause that count 1, aggravated murder, and count 3, distribution of a controlled substance.
That's just because the COE likes the voice. It's very short bite. I'm going to play it one more time.
The prosecution has shown probable cause that count 1, aggravated murder, and count 3, distribution of a controlled substance.
Basically, Ted just saying, yeah, they proved their case in this preliminary hearing. It's got to go to trial. Not much, I guess, to talk about there. Let me play this last piece of sound, and we'll get your take.
Richins has some medical event strong enough that he texts the defendant and says he's considering going to the hospital.
Again, just, I mean, Ted, to your point earlier, these preliminary hearings, these are short bites, and courtesy to, I don't even know who that was, but courtesy of the local station in Salt Lake. During these preliminary hearings, how much do you kind of want, how much of your ammo, so to speak, do you want to keep, you know, in your holster and save it for the trial itself?
Well, from a prosecution standpoint, you want to get over that bar, but you want to make sure you get over it. From a journalistic standpoint, we love prelims because they always give you more than they're comfortable with, and because they have to get over that bar. So you really get a sense of what the state has. They don't, you know, you don't see the actual witnesses come in. Usually officers can testify on what they've heard and seen, and and that's what we saw here. We saw a lot more than we knew before it in terms of the text messages, and it's setting the state up for success. And I told you that judge has a great voice. It's like a fog. It's going to be great.
He looks so young too. It's crazy. I mean, he looks like a young guy. Just one or two more things, and then we'll wrap it up with closing thoughts. The night that Eric dies, Kouri is celebrating with her mom, Lisa Darden, Greg. Kind of crazy that they were celebrating this closure of the mansion that everyone's been talking about. Some more information that we're learning. Kouri allegedly made this cocktail spike with fentanyl, but the medical examiner determined that Eric had more than 5 times the lethal amount, but also found something else, which is, I'm going to butcher the name, 16,000 something milliliters of quetiapine. And it's antipsychotic medication that's used as a sleep aid. We haven't really heard this discussed at all. From a legal standpoint, again, what kind of factor is this in the upcoming trial?
I don't know that it will be much of a factor at all unless the defense has an expert who will say that alone could have killed him. I don't know that that's much of a defense or something that the defense attorneys can rely on. And whether or not that was even administered appropriately or inappropriately. We don't know enough about Eric's prescription drug history to know whether that was something that he would have been prescribed. And if so, whether it was in what we call therapeutic limits, in other words, something that's not expected to cause him problems. But the fentanyl was clearly the cause of death here. And I think that the medical examiner will testify to that at trial.
Before joining Core TV, which I'll be on tonight at 9, promoting Core TV with Vinnie Politan, Ted Rollins, he worked for a lot of different stations, including 20 years as a correspondent for CNN and ABC News, O.J. Simpson, Jody Arias, you know, all the big names. Ted, I got to ask you a question that has nothing to do with anything here specifically. What is the craziest thing you've seen in a courtroom in your time covering trials? Is there one crazy thing that jumps out at you?
You know, there's been so many different things that have at the time shocked because it's the first time seeing people. Anyone who represents themselves for me is just pure theater, and it's crazy. People are so obsessed. We had one in Milwaukee, Daryl Brooks, that he thought he could represent himself. Robert Tellis just this last week in Las Vegas did a portion of it. I've seen so much inside courtrooms that nothing really stands out, except when defendants either represent themselves or they take the stand. It takes everyone's, no matter what's happened before the beginning of the trial and during the trial, it's over. It's just that person. They get the jury's attention, and there's nothing like it.
Look, Ted is becoming like Phil Waters, the detective. Nothing surprises him after all these years. I literally try to get those two guys
it's very
every
sad,
week.
actually.
Yeah, it is. If you think about like you know, an 8-year-old kid who'd be amazed by all of this. Sadly, I mean, it's a bad example, I guess, but you know what I'm saying? Like a younger person, once you've been in it, you get jaded. So that's part of life, I guess. Megan Connor, she's the mother of 6 spectacular human beings. I like how she writes that. And a breaker of generational trauma cycles. She herself survived sex trafficking as a child, spending almost 40 years in other abusive systems before finally learning how to break free. She has a book, I Walked Through Fire to Get Here, and 100 Ways to Practice Self-Care, 2 separate books. And she hosts the Midlife Revolution podcast. I'm going to leave it open-ended. Megan, take it away if you want to talk about this or something else.
Well, I do want to put in a plug for your book because I did read it over the summer and I found it incredibly moving. And I had to take some of it in small doses because it was a lot to think about. So I really appreciate the job you did on that. And Carm's a rock star. I can't wait to meet her someday. I think she's amazing. And
Megan,
what I talk about on my channel.
Just please tell everyone that I did not pay you to say that, please.
Did not pay me to say that. You and I haven't talked since I finished the book. I don't think I texted you when I was done with it. But
yeah, thank you so
much.
What
I talk about on my channel is about healing. And what I took away from being so involved in Lori's case is that a lot of us know people like Lori who are one person on the outside and completely different, manipulative, controlling on the inside. And I think the more that people can learn to recognize those traits in people early on and hold them accountable, the less often that we're going to have tragedies happen. And so my channel is all about healing and moving forward and finding healthier ways to relate to people, healthier religions, and healthier family relationships.
Check out the podcast, Midlife Revolution. Have to come back to Ted for this one. I'd like to know the ageless Ted's skincare routine. Can't leave without the answer to this. I don't want to get jealous, Ted, but my 10-year-old daughter is now doing what is known as a glow up on me. She glows up my face with moisturizers and creams. And after she does it, I'm like a different person. She should do it before the podcast. What is your secret, Ted Rollins?
Just tons of booze and cigars. That's really worked out for me.
The Wisconsin humor.
That's my regimen too.
Yeah. It's working well, Ted. Not a single gray hair. The guy looks fantastic. Greg Skordas also looks amazing. He represents the family. Are you still doing that in official capacity, Greg, representing the Richins family?
A family spokesperson.
Oh, there you go. Family spokesperson. He's practiced law since 82, even though he looks like he's practiced law since 2002. Everyone looking young and spry on this channel. I love it. He also was in the public defender's office. Greg, from a legal perspective, what is next for this? I know we've got the hearing in September. Do you expect this to kick off, this trial, in April, or is your gut telling you it will be later?
I think it's going to be later. I think there are going to be experts that will be consulted for both sides. Those can take a while. Although April is far enough down the road that the defense really doesn't have much of an excuse not to be ready by then. But they are new on the case. As you've mentioned, Skylar Zarro had it for a while. They've come in, but they were ready for the prelim. They did a good job at their preliminary hearing, and I expect that they'll do a very good job at trial as well.
An amazing panel, continuing to deliver on the best guests in true crime. Ted Rollins, Megan Connor, Greg Skordas, thank you for being here. Love you, America. Love you, Atlanta, Georgia. Megan, I don't even know where you are, somewhere in the middle of the country. Is it Texas? Texas. And Greg Skordas coming to us from beautiful Utah. We will see you tomorrow night. Sky could be the guest to discuss this with 2 other interesting attorneys who will be here. And by the way, don't forget, Friday morning, Ted knows this, Donna Adelson, she's in court for a long hearing Friday morning. We're taking that live Friday, and Tim Jansen's going to be in my co-pilot seat, breaking it all down with color commentary as that hearing kicks off Friday morning. See you guys tomorrow night. See you Friday. Have a great evening. You can support the show with a YouTube membership and a Patreon membership. Best thing you guys can do is spread the word. Please tell friends. That's how the show grows. The show grows. We're happy, and we give you even better content. Love you.